Thank you very much, Pradeepa. That was really very interesting. I was particularly impressed with the notion you said about your test, which ran over several days rather than over 2 to 3 hours, as our keynote mentioned as well. And I'm wondering whether sort of lawyers' jokes could be one of your assessment tools. There's a fairly endless supply of those, so maybe they can be assessed as well. Our next speaker is the Faculty Teaching Excellence Award winner from the Faculty of Business and Economics, Professor Anand Chand.
Our guest speaker today, Professor Jeffrey Crisp, DVC Cole, Teaching Learning. I want to start my speech. We were given a topic, and the topic is how do I use assessment and feedback to help you, my students, to do independent in a flexi learning environment. I'm Anand from the School of Management. I've got number of slides, so I'll try to be straight and simple, short and simple, and try to emphasize few things that were picked up by the from the guest speaker and other speakers earlier, and my own views to that. You can hear me at the back? Yep. Yep, you can. Okay, these were the sort of the criteria that you were given to do our portfolio. I mean, it's a huge topic, as challenging as DVC Cole has mentioned. So the criteria given for our presentation was: 1, integrating assessment to learning outcomes. Number 2, using a variety of assessment and feedback strategies, adopting assessment methods to different contexts and diverse student needs in terms of gender, ethnicity, and disabled students, implementing both formative and summative assessment. And I think our guest speaker earlier did a good job on that aspect, but I'll keep a slide for that as well. Okay, the first one was alignment and linking the assessment task. So basically, I'm going from the student assessment, individual task, to the course learning outcomes, then to the school SMPA learning outcomes, and the USP's graduate outcomes. So this is very crucial. And this is mentioned by authors like Biggs, etc. So I've given you a chart. I didn't draw any arrows there because it's not linear. It can go from any side, any angle. So it's quite multilateral in that particular approach. Even though, as we said, they are, university graduate outcomes out there. People forget about it, learn it. And in some schools, they are not related to the university graduate attributes. So I think some of these schools may need to re-look at their course learning outcomes and the individual tasks to do that. Since we are embarking on this, so my next task will be, as head of school, would be to look at all the management courses and try to correct them as well. Strategic approach to integrating assessment strategies. As I said, there is a link, and we've talked about it in the diagram. I've picked up each of the university graduate outcomes and tried to link in that way. So that's how I've structured my speech. As I said, it was difficult to sort of narrow it down in 10 minutes. So the first one is the university goal of communication. This is what we want our graduates to take away to the workplace. So the assessment has to be geared whereby the students developed a very good verbal, non-verbal cues. They have to understand how things work. A good speaker, what is a good speaker in a presentation? What are the presentation skills? And that is very important. And hand gestures are very important, especially if we are trying to demonstrate some particular point or emphasize some points. And we've noticed that our debate students are, the debate team students actually can win a debate not only by the arguments, but just also by the hand gestures. Clear, good speech during and all that. And we have developed a marking rubric for my courses, for seminar presentation, and we're looking at all the elements the graduate outcomes of the university on this one. For my tutorial participation and seminar feedback, I actually decide that I give the feedback immediately after the presentation. It's fresh in my mind. I write the comments down. What were the, the good strengths of the student in the seminar, and what were the weaknesses. So I do an immediate feedback. For the written part, I give a mark later. So I divide the marks in terms of verbal presentation and etc. And I find it very useful, and students appreciate instant feedback, not a feedback 2 months later, what they need to do with their seminars. So that is the other one. Tutorial participation also is a form of continuous feedback. It's a formative assessment process I have. So basically I give them feedback immediately. And I think students appreciate, and we've heard students mention earlier, they want constant, earlier feedback so they can improve. So there's a continuous improvement system that is taking place. The other one in tutorials, it's not just everybody participation, because I've seen a lot of course outlines which has give 10 marks for class participation. It's not only that, it's also marks are based on clarity of the argument, the responses the students give, a critical issue, the debates they present, and they also, by putting the debates, they show that they have done some extra readings from journal articles and solid material. So it actually allows me as a lecturer to differentiate between a person who talks a lot but doesn't give very good arguments compared to a person who only talks once or twice but actually comes up with very, very good reasoning and justification. Creativity, we talked about this in the morning, innovative ideas. I think VC talked about it, entrepreneurship and creative ideas during my lectures, etc. And in terms of divergence and convergence of the thing. And I'm giving you an example from my MG 400 level course, which is about negotiation and conflict resolution used by governments, companies, organizations all over. What I do is, rather than giving them a lecture on how to do a collective bargaining, I actually run a mock exercise. So I divide the groups of people into two groups. One group representing the management, one group representing the trade union officials, because in the HR area, at the end of the day, where companies have trade unions, you have to negotiate with them, you have to come with collective bargaining and make those kind of agreements. So the question is not teaching about it, but make them actually conduct it. So that's what I do, and I give a case study, and I give two sets of instructions, which is similar to the management and the trade union officials or the negotiating parties. It could be some lawyers as well, and they come up with the answers. And then we compare that with what the company actually came up with. The example the HR people came up with. And they are very good examples. And talking about divergence of answers rather than that, I find it very interesting while I was listening to your speech, the question whether the company should provide morning tea. So currently a scenario is the company is providing the workers of a construction company, 500 workers, morning tea and afternoon tea and coffee. The question is whether they should provide it. And given the cost is, company is coming down. So we give you the financial facts, figures, etc. And then you come up with a lot of interesting answers. And every year, the students come up with different answers. For example, some might agree, for example, that you give the morning tea, but cut out the afternoon tea. They don't need the afternoon tea because they had the lunch. So there are a lot of justifications. Some of them will say, give the tea for both the sessions, but no coffee. Another group will come up and say, give the tea and the coffee, but black. Don't give them the milk. And another group came up with say, no, just provide them with hot water, tell them to bring the teacups and the bags, etc. from home. So that is a good example of how, and every year they come up with very innovative ideas of that. So I call that a mock collective bargaining agreement. And some of them would give a pay increase, but cut the tea and the coffee. So they evaluate it in that way. And there's a question on OHS, whether they should be provided with new helmets. So the students come up with an answer, yes, they can have a new helmet every year, provided they bring the old one back so they haven't given it to the relatives in the village. So that's another example they come up with. And one of them or a couple of them say, we don't want we want to reduce the cost of the helmet, so we don't buy it from Australia, we buy it from China. So they come up with all sorts of responses with a justification, of course, on that one. Mobile learning, I've noticed for my 400 level class, I've seen people now, while if they're listening to the speech, they're on their mobiles. So I said to myself one day, okay, why don't I use a mobile in my classroom? For 5-10 minutes, I say, now go and type the Ministry of Labor website, get a mediation case or a tribunal case, actual case that was decided. Form them in a group and say, this is the judgment that was made by the judge. What other solutions you can come up with? There was a case where, a real situation where LTA, the land transport body, had booked a lady for not wearing a seat belt. She was rushing to the hospital, she was pregnant, so she was not wearing the seat belt. So she got charged for not wearing a seat belt. In that case, the husband refused to pay, and they went to the judgment, and the judge said no, because she's pregnant and that's an exceptional case. So there has to be some flexibility of applying law in that case. So there are a lot of examples in the mediation cases as we go along. So those are some of the practical, action-based type of, because these are the kind of exercises they'll have to do in the real world, in the industry. And there's a lot of demand from the ministry. So I have a lot of contacts with the Ministry of Labor, and this is, we learn from our industry group experience. So it's no longer the old content-based learning, but more actual practical exercises. And I find that is very useful, and the students really enjoy it. The only difference in a collective bargaining in the real world and in a classroom is that in the classroom they laugh a lot, whereas in the real world there's serious negotiations going on between them. Okay, critical thinking and content. So that's one of my philosophies of being a teacher, is critical thinking. It's not just learning the content, no longer the rote learning exercise, So even in assessment, you could change things. So if you tell students to give you assumptions of a particular theory, so I teach theories in employment relations, what is a pluralist theory, they will give you all the assumptions. They'll cram and they'll put it. But what you need to do is give them a scenario in a test or etc. in an assignment and say, this is the sort of how the company is running. Now apply which theory you might apply to that case. It could be one theory, 3 theories, 4 theories, or mixture of theories. So they justify, and normally there is no right or wrong answer in those cases. Class participation as well. They can, I sometimes start a lecture or a class tutorial with a debatable question. Let them think for 5 minutes and write the answers, and then start the lecture on that particular thing. In terms of literature review, I found this last year. I tried this option. When we teach the 400 level courses, postgraduate, one of the requirements is, we're training them to write a thesis or for future, academics. Some of them, what we do is we ask them to, read 10 journal articles and do a literature review. They can't. I mean, my experience, honestly, is they can't. They make a mess of it. So what I did last year is just give them one journal, right? Told them to do 1 page, only 1 small page, and they write the literature review, and I direct them there. So once they get that right, if I can get them to do 1 solid literature review, then the 10 and the 11 and the 20, 30 can follow on later on. So that's what I do in terms of literature review, and I think that works in a way. Smaller piece of assignment, smaller meat to bite, and they can do that. Okay, the other one is specific conscious. I think the VC raised this issue. It's not just saying, in terms of using examples from the Pacific, but actually trying to demonstrate it. I mean, in all my classes, even the Lodala students, if they're coming from Tonga, Samoa, Kiribati, I tell them their projects will be on their country, not this country, right? So they find it very useful. They're familiar with that. Now with all these modern technologies, they can even get a lot of information through email, online, websites, etc. And they do a good job of doing it. And because at the end of the day, I'm preparing them to go back to the countries and help develop their HR skills and HR capacity there. So those are the things. So I make sure all my assessments, and I'm telling my staff as well, add a line, give examples from the Pacific. What's happening in Europe, contrast it with the Pacific. And also respect for Pacific cultures. And the third one there is indigenous methodologies. There is not only one way of looking at the world, there are other indigenous ways of looking at it. Indigenous methodologies have been developed and different cultural views that can be looked at, because Pacific is quite complex, and different people in different areas can come up with different ideas. And these are all incorporated in the essays, projects, and seminars. And this makes the students feel, I mean, I get feedback from the students saying that, oh, we've learned something new today on this issue. Professionalism, again, time management is very important, because that's what the industry demands from us. If the students are continuously giving assignments late, then that's not a very good thing, because at the end of the day, if the minister wants a report by 4 o'clock this afternoon, it's due at 4 o'clock, not tomorrow, or not a couple hours late. So professionalism in times of time management. We use the APA guideline for writing projects. We have to instill these values in the students of what an academic writing is. Nothing sophisticated, but just straight and simple as that. Teamwork, this is what I believe in my classes. As I said, I run mock exercises. Like in terms of the law, they have a moot, a court exercise that is going on. We also do that quite a bit. Group work is very important, because they have to learn, they have to contribute, and obviously most groups don't work together, so they have to, maneuver through all the differences, etc., to come up with a very good, a group think or a group answer, even though there might be divergent views as we go along. Group seminars, yes, we look at that as a very important one, what they participate, etc. And also to, in group seminars, I try to make teams that are diverse, inclusive of everybody, minority groups, etc. And if they're all from Fiji, I will say, no, not good group, get somebody from the other Pacific Islands, gender distribution. So the people have different views of that. And I do, as an ex-sociology, take a lot of effort to involve the minority and the disadvantaged groups in my class as well. Just a sort of, because we were sort of asked to a little bit talk about formative and summative assessment. I think the guest speaker did a very good job. Basically, the difference is one is a continuous feedback. The previous speaker had talked about, immediate feedback. Like in my seminars, I give immediate feedback 10 minutes after the seminar is finished. Etc. And I look at the strengths and the weaknesses. When I mark assignments, I tell them, these are the good things you've done, these are the things that you need to improve. And I refer, and I work very closely with the SLS, the Students Learning Support Center, peer mentoring. In fact, I've written 1 or 2 articles on peer mentoring and published them. And by doing that, I've learned a lot in terms of what the importance are as well. Then the summative, the weak students are identified, you give them a bit of help, etc., so that they can come with equal power with other students. And also I've noticed sort of one of the points raised earlier was about knowing where to pitch your lecture. Sometimes in my undergraduate, it's okay. The students have done the 100 level, 200, they have the prerequisites and they understand the concepts and the diagrams, etc. But at the 400 level, the people coming from workplace, etc., they may not know. So I ask them, the first question is, how many of you have done HR? How many of you have done employment relations? How many of you have done industrial relations? So then I use that and then try to identify the weak students and raise the bar for them as well. So those are some of my thoughts on this one in terms of linking it in summary to the various learning objectives, or the assessment task linked to the course learning outcomes, to the SMPA learning outcomes, and then to the university graduate outcomes. Communication, develop very good skills, presentation, etc. Come up with creativity, innovative, we think outside the box, critical, critique of existing literature, and finding research gaps. I mean, especially some of my master students hardly know how to check a literature gap, how to find it, and how to contribute to existing things. Pacific consciousness is also very, very important. Professionalism, teamwork, very good. This is how the Japanese quality circles system developed, and how the management system works. And the last one is giving continuous feedback to poor performers. We identify them early, we intervene to take some remedial actions on them. So I've used some of the sources by Biggs, and thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm willing to answer that.